She had dug 3 feet into the earth, and still the silence hadn't changed. Just the wind, hot and cruel, brushing past her cheeks like the breath of a ghost. The desert was dry that morning, dry like her throat, dry like her hope. Every scoop of dirt was another memory buried, another reason she no longer wanted to see the sun. Margaret Thorne's fingers were blistered raw, caked in blood and grit wrapped around a shovel that once dug garden beds and now carved her own grave. Her skirt was torn. Her face was streaked with sweat and ash. And behind her, 50 paces away, stood the headstone of her late husband and the unmarked patch where they had lowered her only child. The air smelled of dust, heat, and something faintly metallic like rust or old blood. She'd stopped crying hours ago. Now she just dug. One more foot and she'd lie down in peace. Let the wind cover her. Let time forget her. Then a flicker, movement. She froze. On the horizon, a shimmer like a heat mirage. Then a shape. No 5 shapes, stumbling, small, human, children. Her breath caught. She blinked once, twice. A girl no more than 6 stepped forward, barefoot, face crusted with dust, lips cracked open. Her eyes were too big for her face, sunken from thirst and something deeper. Something hollow. The child lifted her hand just barely and whispered one word, water. It hit Margaret like a bullet through bone. The word was so faint, the wind nearly carried it away. But it stayed. It stayed in her ribs, in her throat, in the shovel now hanging from her fingers. She looked at the 5 of them, more ghosts than children. And for the first time in weeks, her hands began to tremble. They had come from nowhere, out of the desert, out of her grave. Before she was the woman digging her own grave, Margaret Thorne had been someone entirely different. She used to hum while kneading bread in the mornings, her flour-covered hands moving with the rhythm of a life that, though simple, had once felt complete. Back then, the house had been full of light and voices, her husband's laugh echoing from the barn, and her daughter's small feet pattering across the wood floor. They had a little ranch near the end of Red Mesa Valley, where wild sage grew behind the fence posts and the well never ran dry. Margaret had believed in prayer, in hard work, in the goodness of neighbors and the promise of land. Then the sky stopped giving rain, the well turned to mud. The crops withered to dust. And when Thomas, her husband, rode out one day to fix the south fence and didn't return, she found him by sundown under the broken gate. The coroner said it was a horse accident. But Margaret never believed it. Not with the bruises, not with how the loan collector came knocking just 2 days later. And as if loss was never done with her, it came again. Her little girl, Clara, caught fever that winter. Margaret rode through a snowstorm with the child burning in her arms, only to find the town doctor's door locked shut, because Silas Garrett had bought the clinic and moved the doctor to another county. No warning, no replacement. By the time Margaret got home, Clara's lips had turned blue. She never woke again. The world didn't just fall apart. It turned on her. Neighbors who once shared flour and firewood now crossed the street. No one wanted to speak against Garrett, not when he held the deeds to half the territory and could crush a man's living with a letter. Margaret sold her cattle for pennies, then the chickens, then the silver brooch her mother had left her. When the final payment came due on the land, she didn't even fight it. She just stopped answering the door. Her hair went gray faster than the seasons. The Bible on her shelf gathered dust. And the woman who once sang lullabies in the evening now sat in silence, listening to the wind scratch at the windows like claws from the past. No one had come out to the ranch in nearly 2 months. No letters, no visitors, just her, just the memories, and the dry earth calling her home. The shovel had been her idea. Not the gun, not poison, just dirt, just quiet. She wasn't angry anymore, only tired. Tired of burying people. Tired of waking up to silence. Tired of being the last one left with no reason to keep breathing. That morning, she had boiled a last pot of coffee and kissed her daughter's photo one final time. Then she took the shovel, walked behind the house, and began to dig beside the old cottonwood tree, where the roots were deep and the earth still soft. And now, just as she had reached the 3rd foot, 5 children had wandered into her grave, like an answer she didn't ask for. Margaret stood in silence, one hand still loosely gripping the shovel, as 5 children stumbled toward her like survivors from some long-forgotten war. Their clothes were barely holding together, ripped shirts, missing buttons, patches of sunburned skin. Dust clung to their faces like ash, and their feet were bare, torn from walking who knew how far. She didn't move, not yet. The smallest girl, no more than 6, had collapsed to her knees just feet from the edge of Margaret's grave. Her lips barely parted as she gasped for breath, and even from this distance, Margaret could see the white cracks spreading across the child's mouth. The other 4 formed a huddle behind her, wary and trembling. The oldest, a boy of maybe 12, stepped forward, placing himself between the younger ones and the strange woman in the dirt. His jaw was tight, eyes sharp, voice hoarse. "We don't want trouble, ma'am. We just need water." Margaret's instinct screamed at her to look away, to climb back down into the hole and finish what she started. These weren't her children. This wasn't her problem. She had nothing left to give, but the boy kept talking. "We'll work for it, honest. Just let the little ones rest. They can't go no further." That was when the girl on her knees whispered again. One word, a plea. "Please." It was the pleas that broke her. Margaret's legs moved on their own. She dropped the shovel, and the sound of it hitting the dirt felt like something sacred, a vow breaking or a ghost being released. She reached the girl first, kneeling down, brushing the matted hair from her forehead. The child's skin burned beneath her fingers. She turned to the others. "There's water." "Inside," she said, nodding toward the house. The children hesitated. Even in desperation, they didn't move without looking to the boy. "I'm Caleb," he said, then pointed quickly. "That's Anna Marcus Beth, and the baby is Sam." The smallest bundle, barely a shape in the boy's arms, let out a weak, breathless cry. Margaret didn't ask questions. Not yet. She rose to her feet, her knees stiff and aching, and led them toward the porch. As they stepped into the shadow of the house, she caught her own reflection in the cracked window, hair-wild face streaked with dirt and despair dress, torn and stained from the grave. She didn't look like someone children should trust, but they followed her anyway. Inside, the air was stale, but cooler. Margaret pumped the hand-cranked well and filled a chipped basin with water. Caleb passed the tin cup carefully, one child at a time, rationing each sip like it was sacred. Beth, the girl who had collapsed, lay curled on the floor, eyes half-lidded, cheeks flushed with fever. Margaret knelt beside her again, brushing damp hair from her brow. "You're burning up," she whispered. "You need medicine." The words felt absurd the moment she said them. The nearest doctor was 50 miles away, and Margaret hadn't seen a medicine bottle in over a year. All she had was cool water and a damp cloth, and hands that had once cradled her own child in the final hours of a similar fever. "Where did you come from?" she asked Caleb softly. The boy looked toward the window. A dust cloud was rising in the far distance. "Riders. Fast ones. From the Murphy place," he said. "But it ain't safe there no more." Something in his tone made Margaret's heart kick against her ribs. She didn't ask yet. She wasn't ready for answers, not until the children were safe, or at least breathing steady. She turned her eyes to the horizon, where the dust cloud grew darker, closer. Whoever these children were running from was coming. And now, like it or not, she was part of their escape. Margaret stood at the window, her hands clutching the edge of the sill, as her eyes followed the growing dust cloud on the horizon. The sun was higher now, casting long shadows from the fence posts and bleaching the sky to a painful white. Heat waves shimmered above the dry grass, warping the image of the three riders approaching fast. Her voice was barely a whisper. "How long have they been following you?" Caleb stood a few feet behind her, his younger siblings gathered around a chipped kitchen table clutching tin cups and watching the door like it might explode. He hesitated, then replied, his voice edged with something far too old for his years. "Since we ran 2 nights ago, maybe more." Margaret turned to face him fully, her expression sharp. "From where?" He looked away. His shoulders straightened like a man steeling himself for execution. "The Murphy Ranch. We were staying there. Mr. Murphy, he let us work for food sleep in the barn. But he found out something. Something he wasn't supposed to." Margaret's stomach turned. The Murphy place was 30 miles east, remote, quiet, and just close enough to fall under the grip of Silas Garrett, the land baron, who'd taken nearly everything from her. She kept her voice low, gentle. "What did he find out?" Caleb's jaw clenched. "About the river. About Garrett damming it up upstream, starving out the small farms so he could buy them for pennies. He had proof, paperwork. Said he was going to take it to the territorial council. And then the boy swallowed hard. Then Garrett came. With men. Said he wanted to talk. Next morning the house was on fire. Mr. Murphy, Mrs. Murphy, they didn't make it. We ran before they saw us. He looked her dead in the eye. We saw Garrett shoot him. Point blank. Said accidents happen out here. Said we'd have one too if we told." Margaret's knees nearly gave out. She gripped the chair for support, the memory of her husband's so-called accident echoing louder in her mind now. She turned away, her heart pounding so loud it blocked out the ticking of the old wall clock. These weren't just orphans. They were witnesses. "Why come here?" she asked, barely keeping her voice steady. Caleb hesitated. Mr. Murphy said if anything happened to him to find someone named Jed. Jed Foster. Margaret's spine straightened. Jed Foster had once been her husband's best friend, a respected member of the county board. He hadn't spoken to her since the funeral. Caleb continued. "But he's gone from the county seat. Folks said he moved. So, we just walked. And kept walking." Margaret opened her mouth to speak, when the smallest voice in the room cut through everything. "Mama." It was Beth, her fevered face glowing red. Under damp hair, her tiny body curled on a pile of old blankets. She stared up at Margaret, blinking slow pupils, unfocused. Margaret knelt beside her, brushing her fingers along the child's burning temple. "I'm here, sweetheart," she whispered instinctively. The word mama had come out so naturally it tore something inside her clean open. "We need help," Caleb said quietly behind her. "Beth, she's getting worse. If we don't find medicine, real medicine, she won't last another night." Margaret knew it was true. She had buried one child with that fever already. She wouldn't bury another, not if she could stop it. Just then a knock shattered the moment. A slow, deliberate knock. Margaret stood slowly, walking to the door, heart in her throat. She opened it a crack and saw Jed Foster, older, heavier than she remembered, with sweat on his collar and nerves in his eyes. "I heard rumors," he said, "that the Murphy kids were seen out this way. Is it true?" Margaret stared him down. "Why do you care?" Jed lowered his voice. "Garrett's looking for them. Hard. He's offered a bounty, quiet but real. Says it's for runaways." He hesitated. "Margaret, don't get involved. I know what Garrett is. But you can't fight him. Not alone. You knew what he was years ago," she snapped. "When Thomas died. When Clara died. And you said nothing." Jed looked away. "I have a family. I couldn't risk, so you chose silence. And now there's a fire behind every door." Jed reached into his coat, pulled out a folded letter. "Garrett's coming, tonight or tomorrow, with the sheriff. With papers. He'll take your land." Margaret took the letter with a shaking hand. It was a notice of foreclosure, signed and sealed. "I buried hope weeks ago," she said coldly. "But now 5 children are breathing under my roof. You tell me what kind of woman lets them die so she can stay silent." Jed opened his mouth, but no words came. Finally, he turned and walked away, leaving only the dust of his shame behind him. Margaret stood there a long moment before closing the door. Her face was pale eyes like steel. In less than a day, Silas Garrett would return with guns with law and with the weight of silence behind him. But Margaret Thorne was no longer digging a grave. She was preparing to fight. The wind shifted that afternoon. It came not as a breeze, but as a warning, hot, fast and heavy with the scent of sweat dust and smoke. Margaret stood on her porch boots rooted to the warped floorboards, watching the riders come like a storm across the desert. 7 of them. At the front was Silas Garrett astride a stallion as black as his intentions, his silver hair slicked back and untouched by the ride. Flanking him were 6 men, the sheriff, 2 enforcers with rifles strapped to their backs, and 3 others Margaret didn't recognize, but knew by the look in their eyes, killers for hire. She didn't move, didn't flinch. The revolver was hidden under her apron. The cellar door was bolted shut, and 5 children waited below, holding their breath. Garrett dismounted with practiced ease, brushing dust from his tailored vest like this was a business call. He smiled up at her. "Mrs. Thorne, what a fine evening for closure." Margaret said nothing. The sheriff stepped forward, a gaunt man with a badge that gleamed too clean. He cleared his throat and unfolded a document with trembling fingers. "Eviction notice. Signed by the district judge. You've defaulted on the loan. As of this morning, this land belongs to Mr. Garrett." Margaret reached out slowly, took the paper, and didn't look at it. Her voice when it came was dry as the earth beneath them. "You came with guns to collect paper." Garrett's smile widened. "You know how children can be. Frighten easy, hide in all the wrong places." One of his men, a scarred brute with dead eyes, walked casually past the porch, peering through the window into the house. Margaret stepped off the last stair, blocking the doorway. "You have no warrant to search," she said firmly. "I have title," Garrett replied, "and I have patience, but not much." The scarred man chuckled, then reached for the doorknob. "That door opens," Margaret warned, "and someone's going to bleed." The brute stopped. The tension cracked in the air like a gun being cocked. Garrett raised a hand to pause his men, then stepped closer to Margaret, his face now inches from hers. "You're alone, Margaret. No husband, no law, no allies. Just some bad memories and a dusty patch of failure." Margaret didn't blink. "You're wrong." He raised an eyebrow. "I'm not alone. I've got 5 reasons behind that door why you'll have to kill me before you get inside." A beat. Then Garrett's voice dropped to a whisper only she could hear. "You really think you can protect them? Do you know how many graves I've filled to build this empire?" Margaret's hand twitched near her apron fingers, brushing the grip of the revolver. "I was digging mine yesterday," she whispered back, "but I guess you came too late." The silence stretched. The sheriff looked uneasy. One of the younger riders shifted in his saddle, eyeing Margaret with something like pity or fear. Then from inside the house came a small innocent sound, a cough. "Beth." The scarred man smiled. "Sounds like you got company after all." Garrett didn't wait. He turned to his men. "Search the house, top to bottom. Start with the cellar." The sheriff hesitated. "Garrett, if there are children—" "Do it," Garrett barked. And in that moment, Margaret acted. She drew the revolver and fired. The first shot shattered the dirt at the scarred man's boots, making him stumble back. The second bullet lodged into the porch post, inches from Garrett's shoulder. Everyone froze. "One step further, and I make the next one count," she said. Garrett's smile dropped. For the first time, real fury sparked in his eyes. "You just signed your own death sentence." "I did that yesterday," Margaret replied. "Today I'm signing yours." Then a distant sound broke the standoff. Hoofbeats, many, coming fast from the north. Garrett turned his head, snapping toward the rising dust trail in the distance. Margaret's voice cut through the tension like a bell. You hear that? That's the sound of a promise. In the distance, riders crested the hill 10, maybe more. Spears, bows, rifles. Their horses kicked up clouds as they galloped hard toward the ranch. At the front rode Chief Red Hawk Cloak, flapping his expression carved from stone. Margaret's breath hitched. Anna and Marcus had made it. Garrett's eyes widened. Impossible, he hissed. Margaret cocked the revolver one more time. You came here thinking I was buried, she said. Turns out I was just waiting to rise. The thunder of approaching hooves grew louder with every heartbeat. Garrett's men spun around, squinting into the sun as a wall of riders burst over the ridge. Dust swirled behind them, like a storm unleashed from heaven's gate. At the front was Chief Red Hawk Boo, slung across his back, a rifle cradled in one hand. Behind him rode a dozen warriors from the reservation, silent, grim eyes, sharp with purpose. Among them, Margaret spotted Anna and Marcus, holding tight to a single horse, their faces etched with resolve far beyond their years. Garrett staggered back, fury turning to calculation. This is illegal, he spat. You're harboring fugitives. Chief Red Hawk dismounted in one smooth motion, stepping forward with the quiet gravity of someone who had watched men like Garrett destroy too much, too often. You burned the Murphy family, he said in perfect English. The children told us everything. The ground between them held more than just dust. It held reckoning. Margaret didn't lower her revolver. If anything, her grip tightened. Garrett's eyes flicked from her to the chief, to the cellar door behind her house, doing the math, weighing escape. But there was no escape left. Even if you kill me, Garrett hissed, this changes nothing. I have judges, bankers, sheriffs. I own everything west of the river. Margaret stepped down from the porch, slow and steady, her voice firm but quiet. You don't own the truth. Then from behind her came a sound that silenced the wind. Mama, it was Beth. The cellar door creaked open. Caleb helped the little girl up, her cheeks flushed but alive. Behind him, baby Sam let out a soft cry, and Red Hawk's warriors turned, seeing with their own eyes what Garrett had tried to erase. You were willing to kill 5 children, Red Hawk said, lifting his rifle. To silence a story, Garrett reached for his sidearm, but too late. The scarred man beside him tried to lift his weapon. An arrow struck him through the chest before he could aim. He fell with a thud that made Garrett flinch. Gunfire erupted. The warriors moved like water fluid, fast, precise. 2 of Garrett's men went down before they could even fire a shot. The sheriff dove from his horse, crawling behind a trough, eyes wide with horror. Margaret ducked behind a barrel as bullets shattered her porch. She fired once, twice, missing, but keeping Garrett pinned. Caleb had already pulled Beth and Sam back into the cellar, slamming the hatch shut. Then silence, not peace. Just that awful pause between gunshots and the end of breath. When the dust settled, 5 of Garrett's men lay still. 2 had fled into the desert, horses bleeding from stray rounds. Garrett himself had dropped his weapon and now stood at the center of the yard, coat torn, face scraped, rage still alive in his eyes. But now he was surrounded. Chief Red Hawk raised his rifle. Any last words, thief of rivers? Garrett sneered. This won't stop anything. I have copies. I have people. Kill me and others will rise. Margaret stepped forward. You think this ends with your blood? No. It ends with the story. And the children will carry it. A voice called from behind, let him live. It was Jed Foster. He rode in from the eastern road, his shirt soaked with sweat papers in his satchel. He dismounted and pulled free a bundle of documents, their edges scorched but readable. These were hidden in Murphy's old cabin, he said, handing them to Red Hawk. Maps, deeds, letters. Garrett's whole operation documented and signed. Margaret stared at Jed. Why now? His voice cracked. Because I stood silent when your husband died, and again when your daughter did. I can't stand by one more time. Red Hawk took the papers, handed them to a warrior. We'll ride for the capital. With witnesses. With truth, Margaret looked back at Garrett. You came here thinking I was dead. But I was just waiting. For this, Garrett said nothing. Red Hawk stepped forward, pressing the rifle to the man's chest. Your empire ends today. Weeks passed. The trial in the territorial capital made headlines as far as St. Louis. The documents Jed had recovered, paired with the testimony of 5 orphan children, tore through Silas Garrett's empire like fire through dry grass. Judges, once in his pocket, turned their backs. Bankers burned his letters. And in the end, Garrett was sentenced not just by law, but by the land he tried to steal. But that wasn't the end of the story. Back in the Red Mesa Valley, the wind still blew across the plains, but now it carried laughter. Margaret never did finish digging that grave. Instead, she planted a peach tree beside the cottonwood. The children helped her tend to it, watering roots where sorrow once tried to bloom. They built a new house, one with 5 rooms and a wraparound porch. Caleb chopped the lumber. Anna painted the walls a soft yellow. Marcus fixed the hinges that squeaked. Sam took his first steps across the kitchen floor, chasing a tin cup with both hands outstretched. And Beth, sweet Beth, recovered slowly, her fever fading like a bad dream. She called Margaret Mama now. Not out of habit, but with a quiet certainty like the word had always belonged. Some nights, Margaret sat on the porch and watched the sun melt into the desert, her fingers curled around a mug of coffee, and her heart no longer heavy. She told stories again, not just the ones of survival, but the ones of hope. Stories about brave women who once held off bandits with nothing but a kitchen knife, or farmers who fought back not with fists, but with truth and grit. And always the children listened, heads resting on her shoulder, eyes wide with belief. One evening, Caleb asked her why she stayed that day, why she didn't run like most would. Margaret smiled, brushing a lock of hair from Beth's forehead. Because sometimes the ones who've lost the most have the most to give. The desert hadn't changed. It was still dry, still cruel in its way. But inside that house, there was warmth. There was life. There was family. And for the first time in a long time, Margaret Thorne was no longer waiting for death. She was planting things that could grow.